All right, so now we're going to move on to bamboo. And so with onyx bamboo, it's a little bit different than broadleaf, conifer, and palm. And so the first thing that we'll see is the similarities as far as our height and the regions that are being displayed and wireframe mode and shaded. But you'll notice that we don't have sunlight or shadows. Not a big deal. We still have our little helix. And then on the bottom for playback, what's unusual with bamboo is that it's not wind based, it's growth based. So if I rewind and I hit play, you'll see it actually grows the bamboo. So what we're seeing in the lower left corner is, as opposed to frame rate, is year, month, day, hour, and minute. So while bamboo allows you to export an OBJ sequence, if I go to save model as OBJ, growth sequence, it's a growth sequence. It's not a wind sequence. So that could be useful for certain people out there. Not something that I've needed. And so when it comes to wind with bamboo, that's not something that you're going to be able to export out of Onyx. And so to be honest, bamboo is something that's relatively simple in structure. And so, as we saw in the PaintFX DVD, it's something that's not that hard to create with PaintFX, and then you would be able to do wind much easier. So if you really need bamboo with wind, I would end up creating the bamboo via PaintFX. But aside from animation, for stills or for non-moving geometry, again, we're depending on the fact that Onyx comes with a library. And so that is, of course, useful. And there's one thing about the way bamboo grows in reality that you couldn't do with PaintFX, which is the fact that if we just zoom in on this default bamboo tree, we'll see that bamboo trees, if we think of the bamboo shoot, has these breaks in it as it grows. And so, and then the thing that's interesting about bamboo is the branches that grow out of the bamboo shoot actually emanate from those breaks. And so I do actually have a bunch of bamboo around my house as well, and that is something that I've also noticed. So as I scroll around, you'll see that wherever there's a break is where the bamboo grows out of. So for accuracy in your geometry with bamboo, that is an important feature that you wouldn't necessarily be able to create very accurately with PaintFX, although you could cheat it. But that's just something to point out as far as the accuracy of the way Onyx Bamboo is designed. So aside from the different regions for draw, we'll also see with bamboo something different, which is these two buttons right here. And bamboo allows you to create a single bamboo shoot, or you can actually create a bunch of them in a little patch. And so when we look here, we'll now see that we can control or choose to see the region where they're growing out of, this little patch. And then obviously wireframe, shaded, and so forth. So when we look over at the attributes on the right, what we'll see is that we have the first one, which allows you to control that region where they're growing out of, and then the main bamboo shoot, the branches that stem out of it, the twigs that grow off of those branches, and then the leaves. So for my needs, I don't really use the this feature. I really just like to export a single one, since the way I populate a scene is via either instancing via particles or manually placing copies. I don't need to export a big patch. So if you are building a scene or an architectural scene where there's just a small area where bamboo is growing out of, then something like this could be a useful way to really quickly just get a bunch of bamboo to fill that area. So if we go and take a look at the library, you'll see that you have under bamboo library standard and low poly. And so I primarily use standard poly. One of the main differences between the two is that by default, again, if we zoom in here, the bamboo presets have these breaks in them, and that's an actual break in the geometry. So the geometry or the OBJ that you export will have those breaks. You can choose to not have them, but that is something that the standard poly ones would have those breaks, which obviously adds some extra polys, which for near ground bamboo would be logical. While the low poly bamboo do not draw those breaks, but you can control that yourself, even using any of the standard poly bamboo from the library. So if I go into low poly and I grab one and we zoom in, we'll see that it doesn't have those breaks actually modeled. While if I go to standard poly and I zoom in here, you'll see that it does have the breaks modeled. And then you'll notice that the leaves are drawn with geometry, where the shape of the leaf is already in the geometry, something that we liked about palm. And so with bamboo, that's cool as well. But of course, you can choose to have these leaves be drawn as cards if you just want to use cutout opacity. So anyway, when looking at the library with bamboo, some of these are going to load in, or a lot of the, let's go to load parameters, a lot of these you're going to see are going to load with a bunch of them growing, as opposed to just a single shoot. And so you don't need to worry about that. It's really more a matter of finding a bamboo that you feel, is going to work for you. So we can go in and start at the top, and let's say we grab the first one and load that in. So that's what I have right here. If I don't want a group of them, I just want a single shoot, then I just switch to single shoot. And when I export, that's what it's going to export. And so with the single shoot, obviously I can go in now and ignore the first button, which is controlling the way a bunch of them would grow, and just move straight to the trunk. So we can see that this bamboo tree is 2.6 meters tall. So of course I can make it taller. The bamboo that I have outside of my house, I have 3 different types of bamboo. One of them is really tall. I mean, it grows, I'd say, to about 30 feet tall. Another one I have is about 15 feet, different kind of bamboo, and another one I have is shorter and bushier with really, really skinny leaves. So there's quite a wide variety of bamboo. Just do a Google search. And so many of these can be very easily modified to create different varieties, aside from the library. So if I wanted to create one that was 30 feet tall, say around 15 meters tall, I can go to the length inside here and just obviously increase this guy up to about, roughly 15 meters. So now I can see my height is 15 meters. And so now in here, if I just go and zoom out a little bit, I can see what that looks like. So in here, obviously I would then have control over where, for example, branches begin and whatnot. So I've got, for my main stock, we can see we have length, width of the shoot, node, which is basically those culm nodes. That's those breaks that you have inside here. And so middle extension, lower extension, upper width, middle width, all of this has to do with those culm nodes and what they look like and the spacing between them. And so you can see right now, if we hit cancel and we zoom in on this guy, we can see that we have those separate breaks in there. Now, if you're not going to export those, you're just going to export this stock without them, then this is kind of irrelevant because you do have control to export it without them. Because then you could just create a repeating texture that creates that kind of look. But if you want to control inside Onyx what they look like, you could see that if I go in here, let's say upper width is at 5 millimeters, and I increase that, you can see we are making adjustments inside here. And so I can make the upper width and the middle width and the lower width all 9 millimeters, and they're going to get a little bit thicker. You can see we have the extension that's above them and below them. Relatively straightforward stuff in regards to fiddling around these. But you'll notice here it says break node. If I turn that off inside here, and let's zoom out a little bit, you'll see now it's not drawing the breaks. So it's also not wanting to draw the tree correctly. So you saw it for a second. It's just acting funny. But under node, the break node you can choose to be on or off. And so right now, well, there you go. Model node on or off. So that just depends on your needs. Then inside here, if we zoom out a little bit, we then obviously have the node length. So I could make the node length a little bit longer, or I could have those nodes be really tightly packed. Angle. So if I want this tree to grow out a certain angle, maybe have a little bit of curving on it. And so we have bottom, middle, and top curving. And you can choose where that curving begins in 3 different regions. There we go. So I'm just grabbing that. So you can see I can have a different angle at the top there. So I could have it angled down all the way at the top. Have a little bit of angle there, but not as much angle on the bottom. I'm just going in here and messing around. All right, and we can randomize regions. So curving resolution, trans resolution, which you can change when you export. And then there you go. Then we have the branches that come out of the main shoot. So I can choose to have those be a little bit longer by increasing their length. Maybe give them a little bit of curving. So you can see that I can choose to have different curving for the ones that are in the middle. So now you can see they're very straight. Or I can choose to start messing around with the curving on these guys. So as with all of the other Onyx programs, it's just a matter of messing around and getting comfortable with the features. So I really don't want to go, button by button and talk about what's going on. Looking at the leaves, basic stuff: length, width, angle, curving, type. You can see you actually can control the shape of the geometry inside here. So the length, the width, and then we can see the resolution at the base and the resolution at the tip, which is obviously going to affect your poly count. So just basically pretty simple and pretty interactive. And this is when you want to actually get geometry to have the shape for your leaf. So if you do that and you have it be geometry and it has curving on those leaves, so you can see it has 10-degree curving resolution, then your leaves actually inside here can have a little bit of a bend to them. And so, which I can see on some of these, there's a slight amount, but I can go in and you can see now a much more noticeable curl in each of these leaves on this bamboo tree. So it's pretty cool, very, very simple. And then inside here, let's see, what else? We have growth. So this you can see is going to have to do with if you play back the animation for growth. And yeah, so now let's look at the export settings. So inside here, if I hit count, you'll see this is going to be a 350,000 poly bamboo tree. So we're making something that's almost 30 feet tall. So it's got a lot of leaves on it. And as with all of the other Onyx tools, you can see we can choose to have these be set to complex. We're not seeing polyline, however. So the leaves by default are flat, and so that's where most of our polys are going. But for the culms and the branches, basically the important note here is whether or not you want those breakpoints to be modeled. By default, they are, and so that's why there's a little red dot. And so BN stands for break node. Do you want to model the break node in the culm? So if I turn those off, my polygon count is going to drop substantially. So now we're only at 250,000, and now it's not going to draw those individual breakpoints. So when I export the geometry, I won't have it, which means to create it, I would do it via text string. And then of course you have your transversal and curving resolution. So the culm, the branches, and branch 2 are 5-sided going around. And then the curving resolution is at 5. So if I look at my culm, you can see it's only 190 polygons. So as I change my curving resolution, you can see that's going to lower the polygon count versus increase the polygon count. And the culm is the shoot, like the main branch. So you can see it's such a low polygon count that I could lower that to 1 and make it 8-sided, and it's still only 1,000 polys. And then, I would want a single instance, and then you can see end state. You're basically choosing the age at which it's going to export, and you can either specify a specific age or end state, which means once it's fully grown. And then finally, the last thing inside here is we have sub-objects. And so before with Onyx Broadleaf, we had p-objects. And so in here, we have sub-objects. So if I go to my leaves right now and I say on and give me 3, then the leaves will be exported as 3 different meshes so that you could assign different textures. But as you know, I don't care about that because I use the DGX script to randomize my UVs into tiles. And so basically the settings I have right now would be good export settings for this bamboo. So we have complex geometry for the culm, branch, and branch 2. We don't have a polyline option. And then for the leaves, we can see that we have resolution for those. So those are set to 10. And so basically, if we do want to reduce polygon count even further, I could lower the resolution of the leaves down. Or rather, up the number to lower the resolution of the leaves. So its curving resolution is basically kind of like, based on angle curvature, how much it adds divisions. And so basically by increasing the number, it's going to lower the number of polygons. And those are your export settings. So I'm going kind of fast through this stuff because it's all rather basic. So let's go to load parameters, and we looked at the first one. We could jump around and take a look at some different ones. Let's grab this guy. So if this one draws, or it's drawing a bunch of them, it's cool looking, like it's neat to see this variety. But again, the issue is the fact that, this is going to give you all of these as a bundle, and I kind of like to export them one at a time on my own. So you could export it like this if you wanted to, and then once you're in Maya and you import this LBJ, then you could manually choose to separate things out into their individual components. So looking through the library, obviously the diversity of what we're seeing inside here, as opposed to something like palm, conifer, or broadleaf, is much lower, meaning that they all look kind of the same. Bamboo is bamboo. The difference in the end really has to do with how tall it grows and the length and thickness of the leaves, and things that in the end they all feel extremely related to each other. And because of their simple structure, that's why I say it's not that hard to create it with PaintFX if you needed to from an animation perspective. But as always with Onyx, I just like the fact that we have this library that just creates a nice amount of diversity that is designed from the people who created the program. All these presets are based on real types of bamboo. So if you use these as a start point for building your own bamboo library, you're going to have something that right off the bat is going to look a lot more natural. So that is the basics of the UI for Onyx Bamboo. So the next thing obviously to move on to then is jumping to Maya. So we're not going to talk about exporting the animation or doing growth sequences. It's really just export your geometry. Once you've played with all of your settings, maybe we just want a single one, and export OBJ. And then again, if we don't want those breakpoints, just turn off break node. And this guy you can see is only 7,000 polygons. So that's the basics of the Bamboo UI. So let's now close Onyx Bamboo and jump over to Maya. And what I have in here are 6 different bamboo trees that are all based on the same tree in Onyx. I just randomized the seed value on them a little bit just so I got some variety. And so we can see the way that they're exported is we can see we have the main shoot and then the culm nodes, branches, branch 2, leaf stems, and the leaves. And then in here for the leaves, if I go to the UV texture editor, you can see that I put them into a 3x3 tile. And again, the UVs look weird when you have all of them selected, but just, grab a single leaf and select all the polys for it. Go to the UV texture editor, and you can see that's what a single leaf looks like right there. And once again, you can see I'm using my 3x3 texture that we used with the palm fronds and that I also use with grass and a few other types of plants. And so that works fine for bamboo trees as well. So if we get in a little bit closer and take a look, we can see that for this main culm node, if we go into wireframe mode, that there's actually a little gap there. And that's filled in by the little culm node. So obviously you can give it a different shader. And then inside here, if we take a look at the UVs, the one thing that you'll notice with the UVs inside here, if we just sort of zoom in, is that the spacing between each break is not the same. So meaning you couldn't just take a texture and repeat it a fixed number going up this way and have it line up correctly. So if you want, the space between each break to have a little bit of a different texture, then it would be kind of a pain. You have to really sit in Photoshop and make your own texture to do that. As opposed to if you didn't export these breaks, then you could just have a texture in Photoshop that has maybe, 4 different, a texture that represents, let's say, 4 of these breakpoints, and then you could repeat that vertically along the entire stock so that you get some variation that repeats, but it would be a lot easier to create and then repurpose for different bamboo trees. So if I import a bamboo tree that I exported where I turned off break node, so let me just go and group that and scale it up a little bit. We can see that with this guy, the geometry has the culm, branch 2, and the leaves, but then the culm, you'll see, does not have the breakpoints in it. So you can see it's just a lot simpler. And so that way you can just repeat a texture along it. So that just depends on how close to camera you're going to be. So it obviously is cool if you're going to be really close to these things that you can see the change in the geometry. So I just felt I needed to point that out about Onyx Bamboo. So looking in at these guys, just like with Palm, the shader setup is extremely simple. And so if I take a look at my scene, first if I just open up the render view window, here I have the render of these guys with 2 shaders. First, like I mentioned, is I did run the DJX script into a 3x3 tile for the leaves. So that's going to be true for all of these guys. And then if I go into Hypershade, and let me delete unused nodes in here, I can see I've got my leaves, which is my standard shader. So nothing special inside here. So translucency and all of that stuff. And then I have a shader which is a simple flat color that I assign to the breakpoints inside there. And then this shader, which is a solid color, which is assigned to all of the shoots that are inside here. So kind of like with Pine, I've got something incredibly simple that doesn't have a texture on it. It'd look a lot better if it did, but it's just sort of pointing out that it's really just a matter of deciding how close you're going to be to it. So like if I have something that's kind of backlit, then the texture issue is not so important. So the rendering setup that we have in here with those 3 shaders is exactly the same as what I have in this QuickTime that I showed you at the beginning of the DVD. And so in here, if I hit play, this is a simple little scene that I built using Onyx Bamboo. So really, really simple. So I have these 6 bamboo trees that are being randomly placed on the geometry via the instancer, some little plants that are made with paint effects that are sitting on the ground, the simple little sort of old wooden stair path that's there, and my grass shader, which is also a leaf shader, which is assigned to all of the leaves, and then this very solid color, simple shader for the bamboo shoots. So it kind of looks fine everywhere except for this one. This one on the left, and it's like, I should have put a texture on it because that obviously looks a little silly. And it's also a little too shiny. The glossiness that I have on that is around 0.3, and I should probably put it down to 0.2 because that highlight's a little strong. But because bamboo, when it's like newly born and comes out, then it is actually kind of shiny, but it with age and weather and dust and stuff will dull out a little bit. So the only criticism I'd say in this image, aside from this guy, is that also they're all green. And if you look at photos of bamboo forests, you'll see that some of them are green, but then the old ones that have died are going to be brown. So you obviously would get a little bit of variation. And then obviously along the bamboo shoot, you also will get some color variation with a combination of, dirt and dust, but also just color variation in the green, just like with regular tree bark. So I didn't really get to that in here, probably just out of time, and then the fact that in general I thought the image looked kind of neat. So this is just, again, the single directional light with final gather. And we'll open this scene just so you can see the settings inside there. But for something that's really simple, just a simple ground plane, 6 bamboo trees instanced off of an emitter that has a texture on it, creating the scene only took a day to make. And just futzing around with rendering and making the little stairs with the texture on them that's kind of random. But I think it's relatively effective. So, and then I also have a couple stills of it as well that are higher res that we'll take a look at. But let's, before we do that, switch to that scene. So in here, again, this was just the purpose of showing just some bamboo trees that are imported from Onyx. So visible and reflections, visible and refractions, assigning the shaders, randomizing the UVs into 3x3 tiles for the leaves. And then once that's done, building a little scene for the bamboo. So that's the next thing we'll do is let's take a look at that scene. So this is Onyx Bamboo 00. So let me go to 01. And now I can see I've modeled the simple geometry, and if I rewind and hit play, the bamboo pops in. So I'm just going to pause for a second, and in the next chapter we're going to take this scene and evaluate it. And so I can switch to geometry just so we can see all the bamboo pop up. Up here we can see it's about 77 million polys. This is the first save of this scene, so I don't have the stairs and stuff in there yet, but I'm going to pause for a second. Next chapter we'll deconstruct this scene.